Well, my name is Todd Donovan, and I'm 53 years old. My wife and I live in Chester, New Hampshire. And I currently own my own business called Freedom Hill Consulting, where we do data strategy, product implementation, and data analysis. And we're also venturing into community risk reduction for fire departments, helicopter services, emergency departments, and their data needs. I'm also a person with lived mental health experience. And I found a treatment that worked 9 years ago, and I am in remission from depression right now. My first suicide attempt was at the age of 8 years old, and I had another attempt at the age of 14 that landed me in the hospital for quite a bit of medical problems. I never told anybody about these attempts, and nobody knew that they were suicide attempts. And then at the age of 18, I was discovered in a suicide attempt by a police officer. And I was admitted to a psychiatric facility in Nashua back in the late 80s. And I got a diagnosis of major depression with psychotic episodes. And that major depression and the psychotic episodes were, they were images of my own suicide, traumatic images that I would see over and over and over again. It doesn't matter what day of the week or day of the year, I would always see those suicidal images. But when I was 14, I was having those suicidal images, and I heard a voice for the first time that told me to do it. And from the age of 14 all the way up to the age of 44, when I got treatment that worked, I heard that voice consistently. When I graduated high school and I got out of and I was hospitalized for my first time, I decided that I would try to become a paramedic. And I went to basic EMT school, and I wound up marrying the cutest girl in the EMT class, and we've been married for 31 years. I thought that if I went and became an EMT, that my depression would go away, and it didn't. I thought that if I went to paramedic school, that my depression would go away. So I went to New Hampshire Tech and got my paramedic and associate degree, and it didn't go away. The voice didn't go away, the images didn't go away. In fact, they started getting worse in my late 20s. And then I got into the fire service in 2002 with the Derry Fire Department, and I was a paramedic firefighter there, and I retired recently as a lieutenant. My experience with major depression and being in the fire service was very tenuous, especially towards the last, towards years 10 and 12, because I had made a decision to die by suicide in the line of duty. And I even had a suicide note taped in my locker. But what was interesting is that my mood and the intersection of an opportunity to die by suicide never intersected for a good couple of years. I had already been hospitalized 6 times. I had been on 11 different medications and numerous iterations of those medications, and I didn't get any relief. If I did get relief, it was very short-lived. But I really didn't believe that I had a mental illness. I just thought that I had a moral failing. I thought there was something I wasn't doing right. I became very organized, I became very religious, I became very everything, very dedicated to my career. I tried everything, and it got more dangerous as I got older because I started to realize that there was nothing I could do to prevent the hopeless feeling, the helpless feeling, and the emptiness. So it became more dangerous, and that I would die by suicide. There's an anecdotal story that I have where I was hospitalized, and I knew that I needed to be hospitalized, so I went to the emergency department, and I was taken to their psychiatric facility in their emergency department. And I heard the door click in the background as I walked through the door. I knew that was it, that I couldn't escape, even if I tried. There was no escape from it. And it gave me so much anxiety. Just being asked to get rid of your clothes with no real explanation. It just takes words to help someone who's in crisis. And it's very important to use your words when people are in crisis. I did have a police officer one time who was really angry with me because of my suicide attempt, but he just turned to me and his countenance just kind of dropped and he said, "Wow, you're having a bad day." And he wasn't condescending, he wasn't incriminating, he wasn't anything other than just, "I know what you're going through." And that helped me a lot. That just disarmed me. I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to go away. And I didn't know where that came from. That was just very spontaneous. And I started to realize that I needed help to make sure that I never got depressed again. And then I found a treatment that worked. This treatment was my wife discovered in the Concord monitor. She put it on the refrigerator, and for 4 months I just kind of looked at it, and it was a new procedure called transcranial magnetic stimulation, and it was being offered at Concord Hospital. And it was actually machine serial number 1. So 9 years ago, I went to my first appointment, and they agreed that I was a good candidate for TMS. And I thought, I have nothing to lose. I've even done a trial of ECT, which helps a lot of people, but it didn't help me at all. In fact, I remember well, I lost 3 months of memory from ECT. I was the best man at my brother's wedding, and I have no recollection of that. I know I was there because there are pictures there, but I have no recollection of that wedding. So I went through a trial of TMS, and TMS is fascinating. So TMS places an MRI-sized magnet over the prefrontal cortex on the left side of your brain. That's where mood is regulated. And TMS introduces a magnetic pulse 2 to 3 centimeters into the prefrontal cortex and causes neurons to fire. And then when one fires, the next one fires, and then the next one fires, and eventually you have a chain of new pathways in the prefrontal cortex. Now, you have to go to 36 treatments. You can drive yourself to it, you could drive away from it. It's not like ECT where you're under general anesthesia. I went to the appointments. It takes 20 minutes. You get 3,000 pulses in that 20-minute time period. And on session number 22, I went to bed. I woke up for session 23, and I didn't have any suicidal images in my mind at all, and which was pretty odd for me because I'd never experienced that before. So I laid in bed and conjured up some suicidal images, but as soon as I stopped purposely doing that, they didn't just appear. And what was even more strange is there was no voice, no drill sergeant voice telling me to do it. And so that's the day that I realized that I got remission from depression. I didn't realize it really. I just knew that something was different. And I don't even remember what day that was, but I do know that the leaves had changed. So it was sometime in November. So what we discovered was if I take 2 low-dose medications, see my medication provider every 3 months, if I see my psychologist every 4 weeks, and I take my 2 low-dose medications, and I go to 1 19-minute TMS treatment every 6 weeks, and it keeps me incredibly high functioning. So high functioning that it saved my marriage, it saved my family. I realized that I had friends. I also discovered that I love people. I'd never experienced that before. I had never seen the colors before in New England. Never. And I was driving myself somewhere, and I just could not believe the color. I'd never seen that before. My wife introduced me to music. She wanted me to listen to a couple Eric Church songs. So I listened to a couple of church songs and I was blown away. I had never listened to music as a teenager. It never gave me hope. It never gave me relief. It wasn't even a distraction. And the other thing that I did is I started to get involved with the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in New Hampshire. And I started with their program called Inner Own Voice, which is people with lived mental health experience talking about their story. And they taught me how to tell my story about my experience with depression and psychotic episodes of hearing a voice. Well, that turned into one talk, and then it turned into 2, then it turned into 10, then it turned into 20. And in the last 6 years, I've been able to speak across the country. To my count, it's been over 17,000 people. So I would very much like treating providers, whether they're nurses, physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, even the social workers, to believe the person. And I think it's really important to listen to them and pick out the words that they use. They'll use words that are final, especially in crisis. And you'll be able to understand them a little bit better if you listen to them. For me as a firefighter and a paramedic, I had one psychologist who threw out there for me to think about, and it's very, very fascinating. She honestly believed that I chose the career I'm in because I wanted to keep myself close to death. And there's a lot of truth to that. And I did. I did keep myself close to death. The things that I have seen and done, you just can't even make a movie out of it because you would think that it just wasn't real. And I see a lot of my fellow firefighters, fire officers, other paramedic firefighters, it's a microcosm of the emergency services organizations, whether it's an emergency department, helicopter service, fire service, EMS, police, a lot of promiscuity, a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs. And that is a way of dealing with the vicarious trauma that you experience. And it is not the toolbox that you need. You need an effective toolbox. And those methods of dealing with your trauma, whether you think it affects you or not, it does. It does. Those are just unnatural things that you see on a daily basis, and need to be dealt with more appropriately than with alcohol, drugs, promiscuity, and even gambling has become more of a problem in my field. So it's amazing what we're at the ground level of something big with mental health. It's remarkable, and it's really, really important that we work on stigma. I strongly believe that anything that prevents you from getting the health care that you deserve, that you need, that you desire, anything that prevents you from getting that is not stigma, it's discrimination. And also, when someone has a seizure, you've seen someone who's had a seizure before, they have muscle movements that just are unnatural. You couldn't do that on your own. That's just something that happens. When someone has a seizure, we know that there is an electrical problem in the brain. Now, that electrical current doesn't come from an outlet that we're plugged into. That comes from a chemical reaction that occurs in the brain, just like a chemical reaction occurs in the heart that causes it to constrict. Well, when we see someone who has a seizure, we never say they committed a seizure. They experienced a seizure. Depression and suicide, attempted suicide or completed suicide, is a sign of a bigger problem going on in the brain, a chemical problem going on in the brain. And for me, I have a chemical problem that is occurring in the prefrontal cortex where mood is regulated. And so it's really important for us to realize that this is a medical problem. This is not a moral failing that I thought I had. I tried everything to get over that moral failing, and I could not do it. It's because I was looking in the wrong area. And it's really important for us to realize that it's not your fault. It really isn't your fault. It's something that can be corrected. Treatment works. I'm living proof.
My name is Cheryl Pacapelli, and I am currently the project director at Harbor Care in Nashua, New Hampshire, where I oversee all the contracts for the state of New Hampshire for peer recovery community centers. And I am a person in long-term recovery from alcohol and other drugs since June 28th, 1989. And what that means for me is since that day when I entered recovery, I haven't used a drink or a drug to change how I feel about any situation or change my mental health or thoughts or anything. And when I say that, it's really hard to believe that it's been like 33 years. I never thought the day I walked into that emergency room that that would be my story. My mother was 17 years old when she gave birth to me, and I was not exactly what you would call a planned pregnancy. So from early on in my childhood, I always felt like everything was my fault. All the problems within my household was my fault. My parents had 3 children in 4 years, so that made my mother 21 years old with 3 children. And we moved back to West Haven, Connecticut, where I spent the next couple of years, but most of my time was in a little town called Clinton, Connecticut, is where I grew up and graduated from high school, and really where my drug and alcohol took off. So growing up in my family, we were a really big Italian family. There was a lot of alcohol use going on around me, which I never realized what that was. Like my grandfather could drink, 30 beers starting at 9 in the morning and just drink throughout the day, and or gallons of wine. And so there's you have to take into account this genetic component also with addiction that I had no idea was within me. And so that was my extended family. My life at home was that you looked from the outside and everything looked okay. We're a middle-class family, but inside, we never talked. No one ever talked to anybody, and it was really dysfunctional and very patriarchal, and a family that just could not communicate. My parents, there was no abuse that ever went on. No one hit each other, but it was emotionally traumatizing every single day of our lives, all of us. But me and my 3 sisters, or 2 sisters, I'm the only one who developed an alcohol and drug use problem. So my parents stayed together for the children for 31 years. And during that time, those 31 years, my father left like 5 different times. And that every time I would be the one that would go back and beg him to come home so that I wasn't left alone with my mother. Eventually, after 31 years of staying together, they eventually did divorce after we were all grown and out of the house. So the very first time that I remember using, I played sports in high school, and the older seniors on the sports team took us freshmen out drinking. Like, that's what your initiation, like, into this sports world culture was, where we drank, you know, and I drank the first night till I passed out, and then continued to drink every single weekend during high school. What ended up happening was people around me stopped using and went on to college and went on to different things. And I continued to use alcohol and marijuana and then eventually cocaine. And I continued to do that where other people might have done it socially. I needed to do that every day. And it wasn't until people in my life started to say, "You have a drug problem," which I denied that I had a drug problem, that I eventually surrendered to the fact that I could not stop using on my own. And at that time, I finally sought treatment. People in my life were saying, "You have a drug problem." And I kept saying, "No, I have a marriage problem, or I have a this problem or a that problem." But I couldn't come to terms with the fact that, you know, I couldn't stop using cocaine. And finally, on the last night before I stopped using, I had a bottle of vodka. I had some kind of pills, probably a Valium or that type of pill, and just piles of cocaine. And I was bleeding internally from snorting cocaine, and I would take the pills to try to come down, and then I would drink the vodka out of the bottle. And at some point during that night, I just surrendered and said I couldn't do this any longer. And I asked for help. And help turned out to be that I needed to drive to the emergency room. Now, why anybody let me drive is another whole question, but I did. And on the way to the emergency room, I stopped and I buried the cocaine next to a telephone pole going onto the highway, because at this point, I really didn't realize that I would never use it again, and it costs a lot of money, so I wanted to make sure I knew where it was when I got out. So let's fast forward a little. I end up in an emergency room, and then, you know, back in the day, in 1989, you could get treatment for 30 days, really, without any trouble. So I did a 7-day detox and then a 30-day treatment program. When I entered the treatment center that I went to in Connecticut, I was unaware of anything that was going to happen. I had never heard about recovery. I had never heard about counseling. I had never heard about 12 steps. I didn't know anything. And I was a scared girl. I was 29 years old, and I met my counselor there. Her name was Linda. And I was so mean to her. And I told her many times she didn't know what she was talking about. She didn't know me. She had no idea. And when I think back, I can't even believe, like, that that person was me compared to who I am today. But she never once yelled back at me. She always treated me with compassion. She always tried different ways to get through to me with empathy and respect, and really tried to understand what I was saying, and I would not give this woman an inch. Yet, today, as I sit here 33 years later, every lesson she tried to teach me has value in my life today. She, no matter how mean I was, and I can have this edge to me, she always treated me with the utmost respect and patience and empathy, and I just couldn't understand how she continued to do that. And, what people needed early in recovery, and what I found was they needed hope, compassion, and to believe that someone believed in them. Those small things throughout my recovery journey have been what people connect to. So understanding that hope, compassion, and connection to another human being is the most important thing. And understanding that people that suffer from addiction or mental health, when they come to the hospital for help, they are in the worst state they have ever been in. And I know when I came, I was a crying mess, scared little girl that all I knew how to do was lash out at everybody. But everybody gave me hope that I could do this. And that's what got me to where I am today. The time that I experienced the most stigma as a result of being an addict or having a substance use disorder was I was approximately 22 years in recovery and developed pancreatitis and went to the emergency room. And for people who are in the medical field, whatever that liver level is, that's supposed to be 150, mine was 20,000. And I was in extreme pain, and they calmed the pain with Dilaudid, I believe, like an intravenous opiate, which I had never used before, so this was new. And when the pain got down to a level that I could communicate with my doctors, the doctor wouldn't believe that I wasn't drinking. He continued to say things like, well, if you haven't been in a car accident or you didn't have any trauma to that area, then the only other reason you could have pancreatitis is because you must be drinking. And for me, who had been, working really hard at not drinking for 22 years, and be a respected member of the community, to have somebody not believe me was just so hard to fathom. And as a result of that, I ended up in the hospital 4 more times. And on the 4th time, I had asked for a different doctor who actually listened to what I was saying when the pain started, I don't drink and I haven't had a drink and it has to be something else. And he performed a test and found a stone in my common bile duct, and I have never had pancreatitis since. So the listening to your patients and believing your patients is so important. And it was really, really hard to think of all the work that I had done to maintain my recovery, that I still wasn't believed. I have been extremely fortunate to have maintained abstinence-based recovery for over 33 years. And I know from my experience and working in the field for over 20 years that for most people, it takes an average of 8 times of attempting recovery to be able to maintain 1 year of recovery. So understanding that, like from the healthcare perspective, some of us who don't come back, we got well, and thank you for that. And some of us are gonna come back again tomorrow, and we wanna be treated the same way as any other patient struggling with a disease that they are having trouble staying in remission from.
My name is Karina Raya. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a sophomore in an accelerated pre-med program at the University of New England in Biddeford, Maine. My occupation, other than student, is I'm a tutor for chemistry, biochemistry, and organic chemistry, a lot of chemistry, and I TA also for general chemistry and principles of chemistry. When I was growing up, my parents got divorced when I was 11. Unfortunately, the way that my mom reacted to the divorce emotionally, it was really difficult for her, and she lost a lot of her own support network, which left her with me and then her extended family, her sisters and brothers out in California. So from that time onward, I was her only emotional support, which was really difficult because I was a kid and I didn't know how to be myself and live my own life and also bear the brunt of all of the anger and frustration and, you know, guilt, shame, whatever it is, sadness, grief of a divorce. On top of that, I mean, there's, you know, mental health issues that run in my own family. On my mom's side, you know, my uncle killed himself when he was about 30. Her father was an alcoholic. We were, you know, Slavic immigrants and just hardworking people that probably didn't believe in mental health or know anything about trauma and, you know, tended to deal with things through drinking or anger. When I was 15, I started to experience some mental health issues, and I went to Hampstead Hospital after engaging in self-harm activity and being found out by, I think, a teacher or something at my school. So from that time onward, I pretty much consistently struggled with mental health and self-harm up until I was about 18. And that's when I met somebody who did heroin. And, you know, I was going to graduate high school, and that kind of freaked me out because being in high school was really great for me. I had a pretty scattered and not so reliable home life. So being in school, it was a small high school in Maine, and all of my like teachers and all the other students, they were my friends. They were like my family. And at the time, I don't think I realized that the potentiality of like moving beyond that and like losing my support network was really stressful. So I was super into drinking to, you know, deal with anxiety. Started doing heroin because it wasn't a peer pressure situation, but I had found a community and people that needed me and I needed them. And obviously heroin makes you feel great and helped a lot with the mental health issues, the depression and the anxiety. Unfortunately, after high school, when I graduated, my mental health continued to deteriorate. until I was about 19. And then I started receiving electroconvulsive therapy. My only experience of going to the hospital for most of my life was for mental health related issues. I only went to the hospital because I had tried to kill myself. I only went to the hospital when I overdosed or when I cut myself. And I already knew going there what it was going to be like. I already knew that I was going to be put in a room and I was going to have to wait. Usually it was the middle of the night, so I'd have to wait for the psychiatrist to show up in the morning. And whenever they did their rounds, they might talk to me for 5 minutes after 24 hours of being in a box with all the lights on and no heat and cold, like they want to go home. But you know you're not going to get any help if you say that either. So you have to go in already with the mentality that you're going to sit in a cold room and be miserable and not have any food or not have anyone to talk to. And you just feel forgotten right away. And you brace yourself for that by dissociating. I mean, you know that you're probably going to have your clothes taken away and like maybe you get to wear like a piece of paper. So you know already when you're going to the ER for mental health issues that you're not going to have a good time. And if you want help, you have to work for it by allowing yourself to be unhappy, to dissociate, to possibly be naked and hungry and cold for long periods of time. I haven't been to the hospital for those reasons in a long time, but I don't think that that's a practice that has changed much over the years. And I understand that there's a lot of regulations and it's difficult to give somebody who's suicidal something with strings on it. But there has to be ways to be able to make people comfortable so that they can wait out this tremendously long period of time and know that like they're not forgotten and they are still a person and there is something positive on the other side. When I was growing up in my teens and young adulthood, I had many emergency room visits. One of the most memorable, I was still in high school and I had overdosed, and I can't remember if I was just doing it not for fun, but just because I felt sad. I was brought to a hospital and I was only semi-conscious. And when I arrived, I was put in a room in the ER and they asked me to drink charcoal. And they handed me the cup and the first thing that they said was, okay, now you're at a party drinking beer like you like to, pretend that's what's in the cup. Just assuming that I was the type of person that was just partying all the time and that's why I was in that situation. When I was using and when I was spending most of my time like in the mental health system, the people that were in the system with me, my colleagues, my peers, were some of the most helpful people in terms of finding resources. So when you have another person who's familiar, maybe they're in recovery, maybe they're not, maybe they're still using, but they're just not in as bad a place as you. All people who use drugs sort of would network for each other. And now we see people like recovery support coaches or peer supports coming into hospitals. And I never had that when I was going to hospitals, but it would have been awesome. It would have been such a nice like sight for sore eyes to be sitting in the ER room and see somebody that maybe looked like me or talked like me or knew some of the people that I knew at some point, to come in and be able to interact with me, because I would have already had a connection with them. There would have already been some iota of trust. Um, and to be able to take advice from a person like that or be directed to services would have been awesome. By the time I was doing shock therapy, I had started the methadone clinic. So I didn't have the same social life that I did when I was, using heroin and drinking all the time. And I was just real low, no friends, not good mental health, sober, but like, what is sobriety if you're not in any sort of like real recovery? So just by a very random coincidence, I went to see a psychiatrist in Portsmouth and I told her what had happened to me. And her response was, I think that you deserve a chance. And she put me on a medication for narcolepsy. And then I started going to yoga. 6 months later, I was just on a plane going to Thailand to like get my certification as a teacher. And after that, I kept going back. It was another community. It was a group of people that when I didn't go to class, they asked where I was and they cared about me. And, they gave me money to be able to afford a plane ticket to be able to go to this training. Um, so that part, even just independent of the yoga, was really meaningful in my recovery. So I did that for like 7 years up until 2020, and I was perfectly content with my life. Um, and then the pandemic happened, which kind of knocked the wind out of the sails of my yoga career. So now I'm in Plan B mode. I applied to go to medical school, and I got accepted to an accelerated program with the University of New England. And they've been a really good school, small classes, nice professors, and I feel like people there are excited again for like, seeing a person in recovery who's trying to do something. And, you know, or at the end of the day, all these things really have just made me want to be able to give back to my community on the local scale, but also I'm really interested in working with like international communities, refugee communities, diaspora communities, because there's a lot that we can, learn from other cultures that can help people who are in recovery now. That just like ties to community. Being a person with a previous history of substance use and mental health issues, uh, I know what it feels like to be in and out of the same institutions over and over and over. And I also know from being on the other side of it now, several of my friends are ER techs and they talk about their regulars, the revolving door patients, the people that come in all the time, every weekend, whatever, it doesn't matter. And they get tired of them. Um, at the state hospital, when I used to go there pretty frequently, there was a woman who worked at the desk. She was just, one of the mental health professionals. She cared about me. She showed me kindness of just being a regular person. She would, give me books or talk to me, ask me questions about myself, tell me about her life. But it meant so much to me. Like her kindness really was a springboard. It was like the launching pad for when I was ready to enter recovery on my own. I've carried that with me and I bring that to all the relationships I have today with whether it's, my friends, my family, or any of the students I work with or my professors, it doesn't matter. But it's that type of behavior when you see somebody coming in over and over and over again, they're learning from you. Like as a healthcare professional, you have the ability to provide mentorship to these revolving door patients, and not through anything complicated, just through being cool. But looking back, if anyone had been more informed about what trauma does to a person, they would have just seen that I was doing the best that I could with the skills and the tools that I had to be able to survive. So even though as healthcare workers, we see people dealing with something that they don't have the tools or the skills to be able to deal with at that moment, that means all of us in healthcare have the opportunity to give people tools and teach people how to use them, and then they can recover. People do recover if they're given the tools. That's the whole point of why people keep fighting. That's why they don't die, is because they want to keep going. I'm just having a moment where I'm really excited. Sometimes, at times like this, when I have a chance to actually sit down and talk about all the things that have happened in my life up until now, mental health stuff, drug addiction stuff, living overseas for a big part of my 20s, all of that, all the people I've been able to work with, all the really great doctors and nurses. I think back to all these people, and it's like overwhelming to think that I will cross over at some point from having been a patient to being a provider. I start medical school in 2024 in the summer. That's nuts. That's crazy. I mean, think about the patients that you have. Think about the people that come in and you see them all the time and you're like, oh no, they're not getting any better. I'm that patient. You did it. I got better. And now I'm going to get to cross over. And I'm going to get to be that person that can usher somebody else into recovery. Maybe they'll get to cross over into healthcare, or maybe they'll be an artist or a musician or a chef. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But that experience of crossing over is immense and emotional, and I am really lucky to experience it. And I'm lucky because I experience it for myself, but I'm also really lucky because I'm gonna get to experience it for a whole bunch of other people. And all you healthcare workers, you get to experience that crossing over and being part of that for many, many other people.